Thank you for the opportunity to reflect on a question that touches the deepest moral convictions of our society, the dignity of human life itself. Few questions test the moral character of a society more profoundly than how it responds to human suffering at the end of life. In recent months, the state of Illinois has taken a step that should give every thoughtful citizen pause. On December 12, 2025, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed into law House Bill 4133, the End-of-Life Option for Terminally Ill Patients Act. The legislation permits physicians under certain circumstances to prescribe medication that terminally ill patients may choose to ingest in order to end their lives. The law is scheduled to take effect in September of 2026. Supporters of this measure often speak in the language of compassion, autonomy, and dignity. Those words appeal to our deepest moral instincts, yet the question before us is deeper. What does authentic passion actually look like when human life becomes fragile? Is compassion the ability to control the moment of death? Or is compassion the courage to remain present when suffering enters the room? That question is not merely medical. It's not merely political. It is profoundly spiritual. From the perspective of the Orthodox Christian tradition, the answer begins with a simple truth. Human life is sacred. Life is not merely a biological process. Life is the breath of God within the human person. Scripture tells us that God formed the human person being from the dust of the earth and breathed into him the breath of life. That divine breath is not merely the beginning of existence. It is the mark of the divine image within every human person. For that reason, the Church has always insisted that human dignity does not depend on health, productivity, independence, or control. Human dignity arises from the image of God. The elderly person suffering from illness still bears that image. The patient confined to a hospital bed still bears that image. The prisoner on death row still bears that image. No illness can erase it. No suffering can diminish it. From this conviction emerges a simple and unwavering truth. The Orthodox Church is pro-life from womb to tomb. Every human life is sacred at its beginning. Every human life is sacred in its frailty. Every human life is sacred in its end. Assisted suicide challenges that principle at its very foundation. The modern argument in favor of assisted suicide rests largely on the concept of control. People who wish to control the timing and manner of their death when illness or suffering becomes overwhelming. The Orthodox Christian tradition proposes something radically different. True dignity does not come from control. True dignity comes from relationship. Human beings are not isolated individuals navigating existence alone. Human beings are persons created for communion with God and with one another. Suffering, painful as it is, does not erase that communion. The cross of Christ reveals this truth in its most powerful form. Christ did not enter the world wrapped in worldly strength. Christ entered the world in vulnerability. Christ accepted suffering, abandonment, humiliation, and death. Through the cross, suffering itself became a place where divine love could be revealed. This does not mean the Church glorifies suffering. Medicine, hospitals, and compassionate care all grew from the Christian desire to relieve pain. What Christianity rejects is the claim that suffering renders a life meaningless. The deeper danger of assisted suicide is the quiet suggestion that some lives may reach a point where they no longer are worth living. History warns us about the consequences of such thinking. Once a society accepts the principle that certain lives may be intentionally ended, the boundaries rarely remain fixed. Eligibility expands, cultural expectations shift, vulnerable people begin to feel pressure. An elderly person may begin to wonder whether his or her continued existence is a burden to their children. A person living with a disability may feel compelled to justify the value of human life. A patient facing expensive medical treatment may begin to believe that choosing death is the responsible decision. Compassion slowly becomes inverted. Instead of asking how we can accompany those who suffer, society begins asking how suffering can be eliminated by eliminating the sufferer. The Orthodox Christian response is profoundly different. The proper response to suffering is presence. Presence from the physicians committed to healing. Presence from families who refuse to abandon their loved ones. Presence from communities that refuse to measure human worth by productivity or independence. Presence from the Church, which proclaims that God remains near even in the darkest moments of human life. St. John Chrysostom expressed this truth beautifully when he wrote, "The poor man, the sick man, the suffering man, these are our teachers, because through them we learn compassion." The presence of the suffering person is not a burden to society. The suffering person reveals who we truly are. Over the years, I have witnessed this truth again and again. While I was serving as a priest, I ministered to a man on Illinois death row, Andrew Kokorales, later executed by the state in 1999. In fact, the last execution carried out in Illinois. He had committed terrible crimes, yet I was never persuaded that he was guilty of the particular crime for which the state ultimately put him to death. Sitting across from him in that prison visiting room, I was reminded of something our public debates often forget. Even in the shadow of execution, a person's humanity does not disappear. I fought and advocated for his life to be spared. He had come to terms with the fact that he would die. I could not. And I could not accept that the final word about a human life should belong to the machinery of death. Experiences like that stay with you. They press a deeper question upon the conscience. Who should hold the authority over life and death? In recent years, that question has returned in another form, as several jurisdictions have enacted laws permitting physicians to assist in ending the lives of those who request it. The circumstances are different, and the language is gentler, yet the moral principle at stake is not so different. For once again, we are deciding whether the final word over a human life belongs to care or to the machinery of death. That experience also points toward a deeper truth that runs through the heart of the Christian faith. Too often, human beings are reduced to the worst thing they have done, or to the worst suffering they endure. Grace refuses that reduction. Grace sees more than the darkest moments of a human life. Grace insists that every human life is larger than its darkest moment. Many of the experiences that eventually found their way into my book, Grace Unbound, the Sacred Activism of an Orthodox Bishop, grew out of encounters with people whose lives had been dismissed or forgotten. Men awaiting execution, people living with HIV/AIDS during years when fear and stigma left many isolated, and families facing suffering that seemed unbearable. Those encounters taught me something simple but profound. The deepest human need is not control. The deepest human need is not escape. The deepest human need is presence. People do not lose hope because they suffer. People lose hope when they believe they suffer alone. My ministry during the early years of the HIV/AIDS pandemic made that painfully clear. Many patients were abandoned because of fear and stigma. Some died without family beside them. The greatest suffering was often not physical pain. The greatest suffering was isolation. The Christian response to that loneliness is not assistance in dying. The Christian response is presence, accompaniment in living. As St. John Chrysostom again once warned his congregation, if you cannot find Christ in the beggar at the church door, you will not find him in the chalice. Christ is present in the fragile. Christ is present in the suffering. Christ is present in every human being whose dignity the world is tempted to forget. The measure of a civilization is revealed in how it treats those people. 15 years ago, the state of Illinois confronted another profound moral question. In 2011, our state abolished the death penalty after years of painful reflection about wrongful convictions and systemic failures. Illinois came to recognize something essential. A system capable of error should never possess the irreversible power to take a human life. That recognition represented a moral turning point. Today, we face another moral crossword. Authentic compassion does not eliminate the suffering person. Authentic compassion walks beside the suffering person. Grace reminds us that life is not something we control. Grace reminds us that life is something we receive. Grace reminds us that dignity does not disappear in weakness. Grace reminds us that love does not retreat in the presence of suffering. Every life is sacred. Every life bears the image of God. Every life remains worthy of love until its natural end. From the womb to the hospital bed to the final breath entrusted back to the Creator, the Orthodox Church remains pro-life from womb to tomb. May we have the wisdom to defend that truth. May we have the courage to live that truth. May we have the compassion to accompany every human life with grace. The gospel, therefore, leaves us with a choice. Not a political choice, not an ideological choice, a moral choice, a human choice, a spiritual choice, the choice between abandonment and accompaniment, the choice between despair and hope, the choice between death and life. May we choose life, because wherever grace enters the human story, death never has the final word.